Alright, so over this past year, I've spent a lot of time playing Corepunk. At this point, coming up on 100 hours in total between all the various tests that I've taken part in, and in that time, the fundamentals of the game have remained intact. Corepunk is still very much so an old school inspired, slow and deliberate open world MMO RPG. But also, based on testing feedback, they have made many adjustments and improvements to the game over these past several months, the latest of which being those that were added for Alpha Test 4, which is what I've been playing over these past few weeks. All of this preparing the game in the lead up to its official early access release, which is happening very shortly. So today's video is sponsored by Artificial Core. They've asked me to give you an overview of the game as it is currently, covering all of the basics, its recent changes, and giving my overall thoughts after all this time. So let's get into it. I want to start off with a quick overview of what Corepunk is. If you've not kept tabs on the game or haven't watched any prior videos, this should help get you up to speed. So Corepunk is an isometric open world game that blends elements of MMOs, MOBAs, and ARPGs. It has many of the expected MMO content, feature, and progression systems, with an isometric camera perspective and gameplay that is quite reminiscent of MOBAs. All of this set in a large, seamless open world with diverse biome variety, PvE and PvP offerings, and opportunities for both solo and group play. Now, one thing they really lean into is the game's old school inspirations, harkening back to a time prior to the modern day guardrails and hand-holding so often seen. No, Corepunk asks you at pretty much every turn to figure things out on your own. This includes figuring out the locations of quest objectives and NPCs, where to go to farm certain resources, how to craft items, what you're even supposed to be doing at any given point in time. Pretty much everything demands that you pay attention, read the dialogue, and figure out what to do, where to go, and how to progress. When describing their target audience, the developer has said that Corepunk is for players who miss the old school immersive experience of classic MMOs, value exploration and self-discovery, enjoy MOBA combat and mechanics, and appreciate ARPG depth and build crafting. Now, as for key features of the game, one of the first immediately obvious standouts is the game's perspective and its combat, which is one of the things that I've liked most about playing Corepunk. The game really does feel like the MMO version of Dota or League, with the fundamentals of movement and combat being nearly identical. It's got click to move, so your character will go to where you click on the ground. This is how you reposition your character as well as perform its basic attacks. And then beyond those, a majority of your abilities and spells are all skill shots that you have to aim, oftentimes requiring you to predict the future position of your target, especially the case in PvP. Now, you've only got a handful of skills. These are active abilities that are predetermined based on the subclass that you pick, which is sort of like characters in a MOBA. But also like MOBAs, the challenge and the skill to the combat all comes to how you position your character, your use of auto attacks, and properly timing your cooldowns. There's even a fog of war mechanic where all you can see is what's in your direct field of view, which can often be obstructed by things like the environment, terrain, and buildings. This plays a big role in both PvE and PvP. So yeah, how you move, how you attack, even the fog of war mechanic, again, it basically plays like a MOBA in an MMO world. And yes, the combat, as I said, is one of the things that I've liked most about Corepunk. Health management also still plays a big role, although they have made many improvements so that it's less of a pain than it was in the past. Now, it is still the case that by default, when below 90% health, there is no baseline out of combat health regeneration. In the past, this was quite the hassle, but it has gotten better for two main reasons. Number one, any health regen consumables, from food to potions and even the campfires, this is all just far more abundant. It is pretty easy to stay stockpiled on all of this stuff. But then also too, there is an entire skill tree that as a baseline grants you out of combat health regeneration. This is the Pathfinder tree, and it is tailored for solo players in order to let you stay topped off and not require constant downtime in between fighting enemies. This has been a great addition, and I've really enjoyed using this skill tree. Now, don't get it wrong, the game still does have a much slower slower pacing than what you might expect from a modern MMO, but they have taken the edge off a bit, especially with the out-of-combat regeneration, thanks to those changes. Now, much of your time playing this game will be spent exploring the open world, doing quests, taking on the PvE threats, and PvPing against other players, as Corepunk features one big, fully open, seamlessly explorable play space. Now, there are currently 3 main biome types that you're going to be exploring in the game. You've got the forest region, which includes farmlands and wooded areas. This likely makes up most of the footage that you're seeing about this game, and that's because the first several hours take place in and around Golden Field, which has this forest farmland biome mix. But then on top of that, you've got the swamps added not too long ago in an update. These are murky wetlands inhabited by mysterious creatures and dangerous terrain. And the steppes, the most recent addition, is a brand new level 20 area that features a vast open landscape with more unique monsters, bosses, and the endgame resources needed for crafting tier 3. Now, every biome is populated with its own particular mix of enemies and challenges, providing some diversity for you as you explore. Now, in terms of content, what exactly are you going to be doing while you're exploring these zones? Well, you're going to be seeking out any objectives to the quest that you have. You'll be farming resources needed for crafting. You'll be grinding PvE enemies for experience and item drops, and then taking on other players because, as I mentioned, there's quite a fair bit of PvP in the open world. While you're working through that PvE related content, many of the zones that you explore will have some open world PvP flagging enabled. Most of the zones outside of the starting region, in fact, are some variation of contested, where you can expect to get into some fights. Now, beyond the open world PvE and PvP, they've also got battlegrounds for structured competitive group play, and some instant dungeons with both solo and group options for you to take on bosses to get rare rewards. In terms of endgame, it's all focused on min-maxing and build optimization, trying to fine-tune your character's gear and build. There are leaderboards and rankings for both PvP and PvE instance content, including battlegrounds and those dungeons. And they have PvP and PvE extraction instances currently in the pipeline. These are said to offer a high-risk, high-reward game mode where you can try to obtain valuable loot at the risk of losing gear upon death. Yes, they're basically adding an extraction mode into Corepunk. As the game progresses through early access, they also have plans to introduce more modes, more heroes, and additional features. Now, game progression comes in a few primary forms. You got vertical progression as you are leveling up your character and in the process unlocking new abilities, new passive talents, and weapon specializations. Passive talents come through these 8 distinct trees that you pick from, each one of these trees tailoring to different playstyles. You got range, you got assassin, you got tanky, you got the Pathfinder one that I told you about, kind of tailored to solo play. Again, 8 of these to choose from. You can mix and match and pretty much respec as ever you please, as the resource to do so is pretty abundant. And then you've got the weapon specializations. This is basically your class spec, and in that you can choose what skills you want to focus on improving, and again, that's going to tailor to sort of a different playstyle focus. And then you've also got some horizontal progression. After reaching the current cap of level 20, the focus is going to turn to min-maxing your gear and your build, while also unlocking crafting recipes, getting rare items, and just refining things across the board. Now, speaking of crafting, the gathering and crafting systems, much of your time in Corepunk, in between doing quest and grinding, is going to be harvesting resources, going after plants, trees, ores, and then skinning wildlife, all of which gives you items to fuel the item crafting. So you've got weaponsmithing, where you can make weapons and chips that give you stat boost for your weapons. There's alchemy for consumables, health and mana regen, but also other passive boost. You've got construction, which is for the artifacts, and this is where your main character stat improvement comes from. These artifacts give you the most offensive and defensive boost in the game. And then there's the mysticism, which is how you get runes, giving you strong passive buffs and enhancements to put into your artifacts. So gathering and crafting, they have their own progression. You're going to start off a beginner, but then the more you do the crafting, the better you get. This makes you more efficient, also unlocking access to better recipes. So with all that covered, the basic loop while you're playing Corepunk, it looks like this. You start off in the starting area of Golden Field, you get your first few quests, you go around exploring, fighting, and looting. Eventually you reach that first town in Golden Field. There's a ton of quests to pick up there, and then you kind of start this adventuring loop of going out, doing things, and then returning home to recoup, put stuff in storage, make more food, and then go back out again. You'll say pick a few quests you like to complete. You're going to head in their general direction based on what you read from the quest description. In that route, you're going to be gathering resources that you'll be using for crafting, chopping down trees, trees, harvesting ores and picking plants, killing enemies you come across, skinning the ones that are skinnable, all while trying to pay attention to find whatever the quest objective is. Usually that's going to be either gathering specific resources, killing certain targets, or finding some items in the environment that you need to pick up. You're going to keep doing this. You're going to be pushing forward, doing your quest objectives, gathering, fighting, looking around. Eventually your health is going to get low, and you're going to need to either set up a campfire, have some of those consumables, or head back to town. Eventually you get to level 5 and you can pick that Pathfinder tree if you want that passive regeneration, which I would highly recommend doing. But yeah, that's the basic loop of this game. You go into town, you pick up all the quests, you look for quests you want to do, you gather, you craft, you kill, you go back to town, back and forth and back and forth. And I think it's really worth emphasizing once more just how like slow and deliberate this game is across the board. The movement, the combat, the gathering and progression systems, even healing, everything is slower paced than what you're probably used to nowadays. They have streamlined and done some tuning to a lot of these things over the recent tests, but still their main philosophy is, hey, we're gonna put you in this game and say, figure things out on your own. And the primary examples that I point to, but again, I want to reiterate, things like the fact that they aren't any map markers for your quest objectives. Now, they have finally added markers for all of the important NPCs. However, whatever quests that you get are going to remain vague, as they never actually show you exactly where to go on the map. You're going to have to, say, kill some enemies in the woods over here, bring back an item, find my long lost brother, or gather some raspberries from these bushes, but they won't tell you or show you where any of this stuff is. They'll just give you a vague area somewhere in Goldenfield. You're going to find this, and then they send you off with hey, that's about it. Good luck. That's like as specific as they get. You are never given any map indicators showing you even the general area of your objective. You just have to pay attention, read about it, and try to figure it out on your own. You even have to dig into seeing whether or not an NPC has a quest for you, because there are no indicators above NPC heads. You don't find that out until you click on the NPC and engage in dialogue with them. Then you can see if they have a quest or not. Combat, you know, it's rather simple, but it does have a challenge in that it's got that MOBA implementation. If you've played any kind of skill shot MOBA over these past like 20 years, it's gonna be similar and familiar to you. That's the combat system they're going with. The biggest thing is really paying attention to your attack timings, to your position in relation to the enemy, trying to dodge any of their telegraphed attacks, knowing your basic attacks, and then weaving cooldowns in between them, and trying to make sure you don't get hit very much, because yes, health management still remains crucial. They have made those improvements, making it so that you get more healing resources. You even have that whole Pathfinder tree. It is still the case that as a baseline, unless you're above that 90% threshold, there is no automatic out of combat health or mana regeneration. Healing requires the use of the food, the potions, and the campfires. There's just a lot more of this, which is really nice. In fact, one great addition that I'm so happy they've finally done is they've added a lot more campfires around the world instead of just one in that main town. There's now many scattered about, which I think is a great inclusion, and I think they should continue to add even more. Also quite slow is the game's general progression just across the board. The time it takes for you to level up your character, to gather the resources you need, to craft and upgrade items, to improve your professions. All of this takes me back to the old days of MMOs. It takes a long time to do pretty much everything. Now, this is intentional. It is unlikely to change on a grand scale. They have designed this game specifically to be slower paced. They want it to be a grind. They want it to take a long time to do things. I am hoping that they continue to do some streamlining, some very specific pain points. Probably the biggest wishes of mine is that they ramp up the quantities of items that you receive while you're gathering resources. For example, I would love to always see basic resources rewarded. If you chop down a tree, you should always get a basic piece of wood, and then some of those higher rarity and specific stuff can then also come in addition to that. Probably still one of my biggest annoyances is the ability to fail crafting. Like, you can spend a whole bunch of time gathering all the resources to craft an item. You go to the crafting vendor, you start the crafting, and then it fails and you're just out of luck. Head back out, start grinding those resources again. I think failing is fine. The fact that it consumes your resources is going to be incredibly frustrating for a lot of people. It has been in the instances that it's happened to me. That said, though, as mentioned, this is all with a very particular vision in mind. This is all quite deliberate. They want it to be this way. They want it to be slow-paced and grindy. They've clearly developed it with this methodical, challenging, and time-consuming game. That is what they're going for. Not a lot of MMOs nowadays take this approach for better or worse. I think there's room in the market for games like this, and there's certainly an audience for games like this. It's definitely going to be filling a niche that goes without saying. So that is the basic overview of what Corepunk is. Now let's talk about the early access launch. When they come to early access, they're going to have the following basic levels of content. You've got that open world, fully seamless with those 3 main biomes, the forest, swamps, and steppes, all of which are divided into several zones, we'll call them. The story content includes over 350 separate quests spread throughout these 3 fully voiced episodes. There are 3 tiers of itemization for you to chase after, divided into those artifacts, weapons, chips, rooms, and consumables. You've got the 4 gathering and 4 crafting progressions to progress through. You've got your character progression with those 8 passive trees with 120 options and 22 separate weapon specialization talents to pick from for every class. You've got the 6 classes, also referred to as heroes, with more of these to come. In fact, they say that currently the plan is for them to release 1 new class every single month. And then beyond leveling up and playing through the quest, gathering and crafting and doing PvP, there's also 15 world bosses for you to find and take on. And then following the early access release, they're planning to add that extraction mode. It's called Extraction Prison Island. That will be coming, as well as the inclusion of more additional PvE dungeons in the game. Now, as for monetization, if you weren't aware, Corepunk is available as a buy-to-play game. There is going to be an in-game store, but it will be entirely cosmetic. They have said that there's going to be no pay-to-win whatsoever, no items that enhance characters' power, no boosters to speak of, and no gameplay advantages that are for sale. All right, so that is basically the crash course introduction to Corepunk, everything you need to know to get you started with the game, what it is, what there is to do. It's really an interesting addition to the MMO genre, I gotta say, not only from its camera perspective and the gameplay style of the fact that it's basically like the MOBA version of an MMO, but also the fact that they're leaning heavily into that older school MMO feel, no guardrails, really focused on player discovery, figuring stuff out on your own rather than just giving you the answers, showing you where the quest objectives are, or even telling you directly what those quest objectives is. Sometimes it's just a little vague. I gotta say, one of the biggest things for me is that I really enjoy the combat. I'm glad that they've done some streamlining to make improvements to reduce downtime, with the health regeneration items being more abundant, with things like the Pathfinder tree. All of that has really helped increase and improve the pacing of the game so that I can get in there and enjoy doing the combat more often. I'm really interested to see all of the game's endgame content, and even more so what they have coming in the pipeline. Previous updates have steadily been moving the game in a good direction. They've been improving it every step of the way, receptive to feedback, while still trying to remain true to their core vision of, yes, this is not going to be a hand-holdy game. They're never going to make it that kind of a game. I do still think that they need to make some further improvements to the pacing and the gameplay loop, but again, overall, Corepunk is clearly delivering something unique. You cannot deny that, and I'm hoping for the best for them. So thanks again to Artificial Core for sponsoring today's video. Hopefully this gives you a good overview and introduction to what Corepunk is. If you want to learn more or check out the early access release yourself happening this week, go ahead and use the link in the description below. But that's going to do it for today's video. Thanks again for watching. Hope you all enjoyed, and I'll see you in the next one. Take it easy.